Jacksonville. The child was born and couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. With Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talked for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
The week that was on the 22nd of September 2018, beaming from WBRN Radio and over the Boston Red Network. This past week is a very interesting week, no doubt about it. The continual soap opera saga involving the Kavanaugh hearings and what Dr. Ford will do and what Dr. Ford will not do, what old man from Iowa there, what is his name? Anyway, I'll have to look it up here in a minute, or will not do. What is McConnell doing? McConnell, of course, is the leader of the Senate for the Republicans there. Senator Grassley, if I never forget him. Anyway, Grassley's in his 80s. And the interesting point about this in terms of Dr. Ford, if you look at the propaganda campaign and where the Republicans are, DJ Trump came out to denounce Dr. Ford. That situation has stung him before. We can recall Roy Moore. He was in that particular contest down in Alabama. He endorsed the wrong person. Roy Moore became the nominee there, and then Trump had to backtrack and endorse Roy Moore. Well, this whole situation is very, very tenuous for DJ Trump, because DJ Trump's polling numbers are going down everywhere but at Rasmussen, but that's an outliner, so we don't really look at it. But in other polls, he's losing a few percentage points as he moves along. What McConnell wants to do is obvious that they confirm Kavanaugh and they'll have a majority on the court, but that's not how it works in this day and time. This episode will not be over with the confirmation of Kavanaugh on the court. Kavanaugh will be a central issue in the election coming up in November, the 2018, and the 2019. His name will continually appear in ads. Now, Clarence Thomas, and we still have this episode, Clarence Thomas 2.0, but it's a totally different situation. Clarence Thomas, yes, had a detrimental effect on the Republican Party. But today, the way things are set up is totally different. These ads are reverberating all over the internet. Now, we'll get to the specifics on the saga of Kavanaugh. Evidently, Kavanaugh was also the head of something called the Beer Keg Club, that they had said they were going to drink 100 kegs of beer before they graduated high school. He was 17 at the time, so I'm assuming he was near a graduation at the time of the escapade there. And one of his cronies came out with a theory about the attack and where it occurred from Google Maps, etc. And he named another member that was associated with the beer keg operation there. And that thing kind of died, but the Republicans were pushing that. This is an act of desperation. They're all over the place. Grassley, let me just go to that. We'll come at this from two different angles, from the Washington Post and from Reuters. Nonetheless, the headline in the Washington Post via the New York Times. So we again have a setup here that the Times has, and the Washington Post, as in the Watergate, they were the principal newspapers broadcasting most of it. Grassley, of course, is the chair of the Judiciary Committee. He set a deadline. It is a headline for noon on Saturday, later today, for Dr. Ford to tell them when she will appear. She will testify decide if and how she will testify. Now, this is the other parts of it. Delay the vote on Kavanaugh's confirmation. That was supposed to happen on Thursday. Didn't happen on Thursday. And, of course, the note is it would cement a Republican majority and move the court further to the right. Grassley gave Ford's attorney until 2:30, actually, that's Eastern Time, to negotiate the terms of her testimony to the committee next week, the Times reported. Early in the night, Grassley said on Twitter, I guess the old man has taken to Twitter also, that he granted extension to Ford after the 10 p.m. deadline. This is getting ridiculous. To reach a deal with Ford's attorneys had passed. Kavanaugh, I just granted another extension to Dr. Ford to decide if she wants to proceed with the statement she made last week to testify to the committee. Grassley wrote on Twitter, she should decide so we can move on. I want to hear her. I hope to hear her, etc. Grassley had said earlier that the panel would hold a vote on the confirmation on Monday unless she appears. In an email to Judiciary Committee, the attorney for Dr. Ford, Deborah Katz, called the deadline aggressive and artificial. And no doubt it's very artificial. Your cavalier treatment of a sexual assault victim who has been doing her best to cooperate with the committee is completely inappropriate. Now, this assault took place in 1982. This is from Reuters. The Republican-controlled Judiciary Committee has struggled on how to proceed with the nomination. Democrats have demanded more time for scrutiny, and Republicans want to move ahead as quickly as possible, no doubt about it. I have no doubts that if the attack on Dr. Ford was as bad as she said, charges would have been immediately filed. Well, this is DJ Trump. It doesn't happen that way. Patty Regan, the daughter of the late President Reagan, wrote about an encounter she had with a entertainment type that she went to see him with some of her songs, and the man raped her. She never reported. She never talked about it. And from Susan Collins here, she's a so-called moderate Republican. There are none. She was appalled by DJ Trump's tweet. We know allegations of sexual assault are the ones that are most unreported crimes that exist, Collins said, according to the Portland Press Herald. And so I thought that the president's tweet was completely inappropriate and wrong. And he's the last person in the world that should be doing any tweets. Senator Gillibrand of New York called it a vile attack. The most powerful man in the world just used his position and platform to attack a sexual assault survivor. She was also on Twitter. This is the same man who has been credibly accused of more than a dozen cases of sexual assault or harassment. And this is something that is like a pick at a ice cube. It's chipping away at his credibility, particularly in suburban locations with women. Now, the only question is when working class women will start to desert DJ Trump. The panel rejected some of her, they called demands, including that Kavanaugh testify first. The committee called additional witnesses that Ford has requested. This would usually be the case, and that only senators be allowed to answer the questions. According to Old Man Grassley, we reserve the option to have female staff members who are sensitive to the particulars of Dr. Ford's allegations. I wonder if they've been sexually assaulted. And our experienced investigators question both the witnesses. Well, their job with Kavanaugh will be to be able to smooth things over. The only thing Kavanaugh can do is deny everything. Whereas McConnell, speaking to some evangelical, otherwise known as nutcases, assured them that Kavanaugh would be confirmed. Well, that's probably no doubt about it. They have the votes at this time. Colin and 3 other Republicans could doom them. Literally, they have a 51 to 49 majority. If they lost just Colin, they would have 50 to 49. In other words, they'd have a 1-vote margin there. But if they lost 2 people, they would be in peril. And this is the irony of the whole situation. There are 2 retiring Republicans. Flake of Arizona, he could vote no. No problem there. He's leaving politics. And also the senator from, where is he from? Tennessee, he's leaving politics. Those are 2 people that could vote no without any consequences. Period. They are so-called, more or less, moderate Republican types. And what this does is, it sets an interesting situation for people like hella so-called moderate Republicans. They now have a target on them in the sense that anyone associated with the Republican Party in any district that they forced into toss-up status. That was why the debate tonight, and we'll fully cover that, between Lion Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke in Texas. Depending on which polls you look at, one poll has a 9-point difference there between Lion Ted and Beto O'Rourke. Another poll has a 4-point spread, and another poll a 2-point spread. And the Cook, we'll get to that in a minute, some of the best-known handicappers in the country, in fact Charlie Cook is, have now put it in the toss-up category. So in other words, we'll evaluate what Lion Ted had to say there. Typical emotional response, trying to get his base out. And this is what Trump is trying to do with this, is get the evangelicals out. That's the whole game plan. Because basically the way it's set up, as far as Kavanaugh is concerned, Trump's base, particularly the evangelicals, will go along because they have no place to go. The problem is the extent to which the business community wants to support him, because they are vulnerable, particularly some of these corporate operations that donate to the Republican Party. They're subject, like the sports shoe, or the shoemaker, recreational shoemaker, Nike. But they could, depending on who they are, they saw what happened with Papa John's. they could be in a particularly not too good situation. Let's go to the Washington Post here. And there's this big thing about self-restraint. Well, DJ Trump has not had any self-restraint. That's one of the problems with the newspapers, particularly monopoly newspapers, the way that they frame things. And we are talking about framing here. Basically the same thing Grassley takes to Twitter. Earlier today, Grassley had warned that he would move forward. It didn't matter. He didn't. So this is part of the problem. He's setting deadlines and he can't take the deadlines. Period. And this has become a basic problem. Now this is crazy here. He was born for the Supreme Court. He was born for it. This is something Trump told some people in Missouri. Very strange. Now Trump is assigning a messianic type a situation there from Jeff Flake. Sounded a similar note saying that I thought that it was incredibly insensitive. No doubt. And from Maggie Henson, she's a senator from New Hampshire. The president's comments are one of the reasons why it's so hard for survivors of sexual assault to come forward. Dr. Ford met with the FBI Friday afternoon as part of the investigation of death threats she has received since agreeing to go public with her allegations, according to attorney Ms. Katz. Katz told Grassley's aide in email, we need until tomorrow to confer with her and to be able to provide you with a well-considered response. Period. She's too busy trying to protect herself from these right-wing nuts. So negotiations between the Republicans and lawyers for Dr. Ford drug into Friday night, and Ford will testify on what conditions. And basically it's sort of the same thing, but now this is this other character that they want to call named Mark Judge. He was a crony and still a friend of Kavanaugh's, who was present during the alleged incident, and called other prominent witnesses to be heard. The Republicans offered a Wednesday hearing rather than a Thursday hearing. Anyway, that is kind of irrelevant, what they offered and what they get. And we want to hear the testimony. Well, they really don't want to hear the testimony, but it's out. And this is one of the problems, too, as we alluded to earlier. This whole hearing thing with Dr. Ford could have been, at least the introductory part of the preparatory stage, could have been a 1 or 2 day story, and now it's drugged into the weekend, and it'll be on all the Sunday talk shows and preparing for this hearing. And what goes next? Now, Grassley saying they were paramount to bullying, and Katz said in email his aides at Ford's FBI meeting at 4 p.m. and heard back to back at 5:47, insisting we accept your invitation for a Washington hearing by 10 p.m. tonight. Dianne Feinstein also got into the act, said in a statement she was shocked and appalled by the Republicans' refusal to wait 24 hours. Well, they are waiting effectively 24 hours to get this in, but as one of the columnists for the Post, Rubin, I think her name is Jennifer Rubin, anyway, excuse me, that she said basically what Dr. Ford should do, and I agree there, is hold a news conference, press conference, and she could present her evidence and present people there. Period. Susanna Geary, I suppose, a friend, former classmate, expressed exasperation at Trump's questions about why didn't she report it. The idea of it, someone had told the FBI 36 years ago, is ludicrous, she said in the interview. And a lot of this doesn't make sense, and this is part of the problem here. Out of the Atlantic, this is by Benjamin Witters. Witters, I suppose, Witters. That Kavanaugh bears the burden of proof. And I won't go into all this. The question isn't whether he can win confirmation. I agree there. It's whether he can defend against the charges he faces in a manner that is both persuasive and honorable. Well, you can forget about the word honorable. There's nothing honorable here. Nor will there be anything persuasive. It's already been polarized. The manner in which Senate Republicans and Kavanaugh supported allies that championed the judge's innocence should sting at the ultimate humiliation. They apparently don't have sufficient confidence in the nominee to let a rational investigation take place before holding a hearing. They apparently don't believe in him enough to make minor accommodations on the day of the hearing to a woman who is receiving death threats. They are publicly floating theories, naming an alternative perpetrator. That is a fairly weak situation. They and then remove and apologize for the theories that are picked up by Fox and Friends, having held up Merrick Garland's nomination for the better part of a year. He was one that a middle road type, but President Obama nominated. I know Brett Kavanaugh for a long time, and in many different contexts. I found him personable. I think the world of him intellectually. I don't believe he lied in Senate testimony. I don't believe he is itching to get on the Supreme Court. I am much less afraid of conservative judges than are some of my liberal friends, as recent as a few days ago. Now, who in the hell is this? I guess this is the author. Said the allegations against him, at least so far as one can tell from press reports, are credible and deserve to be taken serious. If Kavanaugh were asking my advice, to be clear, he hasn't done so, and I wouldn't tell him almost certainly should have his nomination withdrawn. I would tell him almost certainly he should have his nomination withdrawn. The circumstances which he should fight this out are, in my view, extremely limited. I would advise him against letting the Senate Republicans ram his nomination through in this fashion. Dr. B.C. Ford deserves better than that. The court deserves better than that. Let me just finish this up. This was fairly long. This Benjamin Witters is the editor of Lawface and a senior fellow at Brookings. Getting out does not mean admitting that Ford account of his behavior is accurate, something Kavanaugh should certainly not do if her account is not accurate. It only means acknowledging that there is no way to defend against it in a fashion that is both persuasive and honorable in the context of seeking elevation to a job that requires a certain moral visibility. I mean, accepting that this is better to continue, that it's better to continue as a D.C. Circuit judge than play the sort of undignified games the Republicans are playing. Well, there's no doubt about that. That's a situation that is very unfortunate. From Clarence Page here, and I didn't intend to spend as long on this. He wrote a column, "The Irony of Brett Kavanaugh is predicament. I feel the irony for Kavanaugh. to be judged now by the standards he once tried to apply in the toughest way possible in another alleged offender than Bill Clinton. Now it's Kavanaugh who faces allegations of sexual misconduct, which in this case would amount to attempted rape. I sympathize, and that's the same thing they charged Clinton with, a middle-aged person who is called to account for something he or she did in high school. But in high school, we should know the difference between horsing around and criminal sexual assault. I'm abbreviating this, Mr. Page. That might describe Kavanaugh now, although he publicly has not moved left by much. He was not quite 30 years old in 1994, when Ken Starr was ruling there. A bad land deal which morphed into a probe of an extramarital affair with an intern in the Oval Office. That was Bill Clinton. During a house party in the mid-'80s when they were in high school in suburban Washington, that was in Maryland, she said a drunken Kavanaugh, we won't go into all that, was pinned on the hood. But then but even little information of the bruising that Hill went through 1991 against Clarence Thomas. Why Ford, like Hill, might have been more than a little reluctant to come forward. Well, Hill's situation was different. But the political accountability appeared to be what the framers of the Constitution had in mind when they let the judiciary appointments to the political process. And let me just finish up one of his sentences there. I think, thanks partly to Hill and later moments like Me Too, I'd say more Me Too than Hill, alleged sexual misconduct has earned more respect. And with pivotal midterm elections looming, it might not be seen as a fair time to hold a sensitive Supreme Court nomination. Well, this is one of the situations that we are approaching, no doubt about that. Let me go to now. Here we go. Healthcare is a sleeper issue of 2018. Uncle Carl's writing in the Wall Street Journal on the 20th of September. Democrats' most potent national issue in 2018 midterm is healthcare, and it shows up on TV. One in Arizona ad, Martha McSally, the Republican Congresswoman running for Senate, voted to gut protection for people with pre-existing conditions. Another in North Dakota accuses Kevin Kramer of voting 5 times to let insurance companies deny coverage to people with conditions like cancer, and he did in fact do that. Ads like this are airing the airwaves of races for Congress. Governorships, GOP candidates ignore them as at their peril. They are powerful responses, but the Republicans must deploy significant resources and energy for them to prevail. Pre-existing conditions offensive against Republicans based on votes to repeal Obamacare. Now, this is, we have to look at very, very thoroughly. The truth is that McSally, Kramer, spelled it 2 different ways here, with a K and with a C. Anyway, and even Republican Congress who voted for repeal also wanted to require states to provide protection to people with pre-existing conditions. Now here's a clicker. The Republican approach was to let each state figure out how to best accomplish this under a federal system that worked better than Affordable Care Act. Republicans trust the leaders in the states. That's just a complete sellout. Democrats mistakenly insist that Americans must accept all of Obamacare's failings. Lost coverage, lost doctors, skyrocketing premiums, if they be protected from pre-existing conditions. Republicans should argue that they can cover Americans with pre-existing conditions without the the damage, that Obamacare inflicts. And you notice how we're called using Obamacare, put Republicans on the offensive and positions that they are change agents rather than defenders of a healthcare system many Americans believe to be broke. The Dallas policy analyst Goodman suggests Republicans could strengthen their argument by requiring state plans that protect the pre-existing conditions meet certain federal standards. Well, this whole idea of delegating this to the states is the problem in essence. A national insurance system, as Bernie Sanders proposed, would be Medicare for all. We eliminate this, and what would happen with that particular system? You could still have private insurance if you wanted, but Medicare for all, you would eliminate this whole problem of Medicaid, but is a messy system that's federal, state, and the states get into this in their human service departments, and the counties and everyone else gets into it, and it becomes just a mess. For their argument to resonate, the Republicans must also make the issue personal. The Missouri Attorney General, and Josh Hartley, when attacked on the issue debate in a debate by Clara McCaskill, revealed that one of his sons, recently diagnosed with a rare bone disease, he acknowledged he had joined a lawsuit to declare Obamacare unconstitutional, but he said that because of his personal experience, I will never support taking away health insurance coverage from people with pre-existing conditions. He added that the question is going to have are we going to have Obamacare? Well, you're going to have the Affordable Care Act, where you have these, and this is the problem right there. By watering this down and these skinny health plans and all these schemes, the Republicans cannot stand the rigors of the debate. That's the situation right there. There are opportunities for Republicans, back to Uncle Carl here, to appeal to voters on health care. After all, Democrats are raising the issue directly affect only roughly 4% of Americans who get their coverage through the exchange. What about the 56% who get health insurance from their employers, or the 13% who buy it through non-Obamacare market, the 9% who are uninsured? Well, the situation who don't qualify for Medicaid or Medicare. Well, the answer to this is very simple. Under Bernie Sanders' plan, Medicare for all are any of the single-payer plan type plans. This argument would be eliminated, period. And as far as the rising rates, what Obamacare does not do, they do not set rates specifically. That's up to the insurance companies who are in the so-called free enterprise system. And those rates are rising because of the greed of these companies. Now, in some states, there's a limit to what insurance companies can charge. But the problem is, with rising rates, it doesn't really matter. Because if you didn't have the Affordable Care Act, you'd have the emergency room, and people would be driving sometimes 50, 100 miles, 200 miles to find an emergency room they could go to. And those things are charged off, and thus healthcare rates increase. And in primitive places like Alabama and Mississippi, those are the only places. And Beto O'Rourke talked about it in the debate tonight, a gentleman who is now off of his family's policy. He's 26 or 27. He has diabetes. And at that early age, he already has cataracts. He's going to be dead in a few years. And he can't afford insulin, which is the newer insulin is very expensive, no doubt about it. Over $1,000 a month. So he needs health insurance. So his alternative is to leave Texas and move to Boston or somewhere where he can be covered. or there's some state where he can literally get some form of Medicaid, California, etc. So that is what people have to do literally just to live, to survive. And this is where the situation comes up. Let me very quickly go to Uncle Carl here, and then we'll do the sports. September overall changes. This is Jennifer Duffy. The political environment continues to favor Democrats and likely to rob Republicans of majorities in the House and a handful of gubernatorial seats. The conventional wisdom is the fate of the Senate majority will rest more on political geography, no doubt about that. And we'll cover more of this in play. We'll go to Montana. And they moved this from likely Democrat to lean Democrat. That is with John Tesler. In Texas, from lean Republican to toss-up. That is Ted Lyon Cruz's seat. And in the state of West Virginia, from toss-up to lean Democrat. So those are the states' Democratic toss-up races. There are 4 Democrat-held seats in toss-up categories. Bill Nelson. We at the Ouija board, that is our motto. Bill Nelson, depending on, obviously, how the polling goes in the race between Andrew Gillum and DeSantis, will determine what happens with Bill Nelson. And Joe Donnelly, the sheriff in Indiana, Claire McCaskill in Missouri, and Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota. Period. These are in the toss-up categories. In Florida, Scott has heavily outspent Nelson, and Democratic strategists argue that for all those TV ads, he hasn't burned Nelson. No doubt about it. Has a lot of money. In Indiana, Mike Bloom has come under fire was squandering the summer months with little presence on the air. Well, that's neither here nor there. But Democrats feel good where Donnelly is today. Well, yeah, especially in Indiana. Claire McCaskill is walking a fine line between the Democratic base in St. Louis and Kansas City and their suburban and traditional Republican voters, and also in rural areas in Missouri. That's why Trump was there. And the Attorney General, this is Josh Hockley, for criticism for lackluster candidate skills. Well, that is his problem right there. In North Dakota, may be the race that Democrats are most nervous about. Heidi Heitkamp's running a very strong campaign, but her vote against tax reform and repealing Affordable Care Act again. Kramer isn't running as strong a campaign as Heitkamp, but it appears he does need to the state. It's where Trump won out. Some lean Democratic states in Montana, where this is John Tesler is seeking a third term. Normally, with a senator for re-election, the first time is the hardest one. Montana's centric independence, that favors him. Now in West Virginia, it's just the popularity of Joe Meacham there. The Attorney General Moisey isn't the strongest candidate. In these toss-up races, there are 4 in the toss-up Republican toss-up category. Dean Heller in Nevada and Ted Cruz. Yeah, we'll have to go into Arizona. We'll do this later. Nevada and Texas, we'll cover that. The bottom line is the range of outcomes for the Senate is very narrow. The path for Democrats to win a 1-seat majority, but it isn't the most likely scenario. In fact, the third most likely scenario, despite spending close to $1 billion on Senate races, this could prove to be a status quo election, but the Republicans to continue with their 51 seats. That is the overview, and that is where they have ended up. Period. Here, so let's go now and do the Baseball scores. We have 9 days to go this weekend. Some important games going on there. The Dodgers game was a very interesting game. The Dodgers lost the game. It doesn't matter anyway. It was to San Diego, the team at the bottom, the very bottom of the situation. But what was interesting, they had this pitcher, ambidextrous pitcher, named Pat Venditti. Venditti came in and kept the Dodgers in the game. And let's quickly go to this. So on Friday night, the Cubs were on the south side playing the White Sox. White Sox 10-4. Fontana was the loser there. The Red Sox were in Cleveland. Red Sox 7-5. Red Sox already won their division. The Orioles were in New York. Yankees 8-10. The Yankees are trying to literally get into the postseason. The Mets and Nationals in D.C. Mets 4-2. The Brewers and Pirates. Brewers 8-3. The Rays and Blue Jays in Toronto. It was the Rays 11-3. The Royals and Tigers in the Motor City. Two teams that are not going anywhere. 4-3 was the score there. Royals and in 10. The Reds were in Florida. The Marlins pulled that out. 1-0 shut them out. The Phillies were in Atlanta. Atlanta 6-5. And the final in 7. I guess this game was called. The Mariners were in Texas Rangers 8-3. The Angels and Astros in Houston. Astros 11-3. The Giants and Cardinals, the game we tuned into. The Cardinals are still trying to make a race of it. It was 5-3. Cardinals had 11 hits, no errors. And the Giants, that's the Angels. The Giants, 8 hits and no errors there. The Rockies and D-backs, a battle there. It was won by the Rockies 6-2. And in 10, the Twins and Athletics in Oakland. Athletics need to win this game. They did 7-6 for the final score. And the Padres and Dodgers. Dodgers already clinched their division. Padres are going nowhere. 5-2. Let's check out the standings very quickly. And the reason we're doing this is effectively the last week. Try it again. Standings. Boston has already clinched. That's in the American League East. Cleveland has clinched in the American League Central. And in the American League West, the Astros. They're up over Oakland by 3.5. I have to check and see what the Z is there. And Seattle is behind 12. They're out of it. In the National League East, it's Atlanta, and then the Phillies are 7.5 games back. In the Central, the Cubs are holding on there. The Brewers are 1.5 games back. The Cardinals are 4.5 games back. That's still a race. The Dodgers are up. The Rockies are 1.5 games back. The Diamondbacks are 6 games back. They may or may not ever get caught up. Oh, that was a playoff berth there for who had the Z. Let's see who had the Z. The Z. Houston Astros. But the Oakland can still make a game of it. The 3.5 games back with 9 to play. It'll depend on what happens this weekend. This will do it for us. We'll see you on the Monday Morning Quarterback on this side of it, the political side, Boston Red. And on Numbers Man, that is our economics program from the macro perspective. That will come this weekend. And if we have time, we'll get the open source report in we've been working on. We will come later today or tomorrow with the debate between Lion Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. It was held at SMU, a campus that I visited. I was thinking about that. In either 1969 and 1970. Beautiful campus. Still is a beautiful campus. And what we'll do with Clarence Thomas 2.0, hopefully we'll get this up since Monday hearing. So we got a lot to do this weekend. Nonetheless, have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the Monday Morning Quarterback. That'll be on Monday morning from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Good day.